From the beautiful city of Los Angeles, California, we bring you the Gimme Three Podcast. Hello and welcome, cinephiles, cinema lovers, and movie appreciators to the Gimme Three Podcast. This is the podcast where we pick three films connected by one theme. I'm Nicholas Mihm. My co-host, Bella F. Stratus, will be back with us next week when we are celebrating the life, the career, and three films starring the late, great Val Kilmer. But on today's episode, we are once again taking a look back at some of our greatest hits from the Los Angeles Diversity Film Festival. If you missed last week's episode, check it out. Not to be missed. But I announced that the Los Angeles Diversity Film Festival will be returning. That's right. It is coming back to the big screen here in LA, the great, beautiful city of Los Angeles, this August 22nd through the 24th. So as we did last week, today we'll be looking back at some of the award-winning, undeniable, and unforgettable films that LADFF has been honored to screen. And we're going to start with a feature film, Best Summer Ever. This is a romantic comedy, musical hybrid that exemplifies the mission statement of LADFF. So you're going to check out this discussion with lead actress and comedian Shannon DeVido as we discussed her film Best Summer Ever. Our guest today, she's an actor, a comedian, a writer, a singer. She can be seen in the Hulu series Difficult People, and she stars in the film Best Summer Ever, which will be playing in person, everybody, in person at LADFF on July 29th. Ladies and gentlemen, Shannon DeVido. Shannon, thank you for being here.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me. That was such a kind intro. I always think it's weird when people say all those nice things about me because I'm like, do I really do all of those things?
It's weird when somebody... When you go through your day-to-day life, you're thinking like, God, I'm doing too much stuff. And then you hear somebody else say it, and it's like, who is that person?
Yeah, I think that every time, actually. I'm like, I think that you have the wrong person. I just sit in my house and eat Cheetos. So I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Well, that wasn't on your website. If you had the Cheetos thing on your website, I would have mentioned that in the intro as well.
That's on me. I will absolutely update it right now.
Yeah, please do. But thank you for being here. As I mentioned, I'm a huge fan, really excited that this movie, Best Summer Ever, is in the festival this year. It was submitted to LADFF last year and we wanted to screen it, but, the pandemic, obviously, we wanted to show it in a theater because it feels like this is a movie that should be seen with an audience on a big screen. So, thankfully, the Best Summer Ever team and we were both in agreement that it's best to just hold off and wait until we can do it in person. So we're excited to share it on a big screen.
Oh, well, that's so exciting. I mean, I think it's so weird. Like everything was kind of delayed. We were supposed to premiere at South by Southwest last year and Your Lovely Festival. And so it's all like everything it was like a leap year. Like we just are ignoring that year. I'm also younger. It's great. We're just ignoring that whole year happened.
I always thought, why didn't they just make this year 2020? Like, why didn't they just say,
oh, don't do that to this year. That's mean. That's so mean.
That's true. That's got a bad rep.
Yeah, no, let's not do that again. Let's go ahead and not ever do that year again.
They should change the perfect vision. That should not be 2020 vision anymore. It should be like, they should change the number.
2021.
Yeah. But Best Summer Ever is such a great, energetic movie. For those who don't know about this film, tell the audience about Best Summer Ever. What is Best Summer Ever?
Sure. It is a teen musical, kind of if Footloose and Grease had a baby, you would have this film. Mm-hmm. I feel like it's a joyous movie about two kids that are falling in love and, antics that ensue. It's a fun film. I guess that's what I usually say.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, a lot of great musical sequences. One of the amazing things about the film is over 50% of the cast and crew were people with disabilities. which literally never happens. And I'm not just saying that like as a like catchphrase, that it literally never happens.
It's the first one, I believe. I think that we are the first to have such an inclusive film, not only in front of the camera, but also behind.
Yeah, which is, I mean, it's historic and incredible. So what was it like for you working on a film with this historic landmark?
Yeah, you know, at the time, I didn't really think about it. It's interesting to do all these interviews and talk about it and really kind of, you know, feel the weight upon which you have after like thinking about the film and watching it and having people comment on it. But, you know, during it, I didn't really feel the gravity. It was just kind of like, oh, this is a job I was hired to do. And I want to make sure I'm doing it. Yeah. And, you know, I've been an actor for so long. So it's like, I just wanted to do the best job I could possibly do. I'd never led a film before. And so I was so focused on not sucking that I don't really think I realized what we were doing, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it totally does. I mean, you're focused on the task at hand. And, you know, I've seen a lot of BTS material and a BTS documentary about the making of the film. And, you know, everybody who was working on it, like you guys were kind of up against it with making a musical is no easy task. Making a musical on a budget and on a very short timeline is even a harder task. So I can imagine you guys had your eye on the prize. There was no time to like dilly dally. You had to get this thing done and shot, and you guys pulled it off incredibly.
Oh, thank you. Well, I will say one thing is that the directors and the producers made the environment just such a warm, welcoming place that it didn't feel like we were under this pressure to get it all done. And we didn't feel the pressure, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I put a lot of pressure on myself because I'm a weird perfectionist and have standards that are impossible to reach. But the environment that was created and the world that we got to play in was so warm and accepting and kind and powerful that you felt free to do anything. And I think when you're making a musical, that is such a gift to have all these people who were supporting you to the nth degree.
That's great. And I think that really comes across on screen, you know, that warmth and that openness. One of the great things about this movie for you, after like watching it the first time, going to look up some of your other work and coming back to it, is like you really get to show off all of your talents in this movie. Like your comedic timing in this movie is just like thread the needle perfection. We get to hear your beautiful voice and we get to see you act. So talk to us about like you get to exercise all of your talents in one film, which doesn't always happen. So talk to us about that.
Oh, that's so nice you say. You know, I have been doing all of those things for quite some time. I've never gotten to sing on camera in a professional setting, which was such a joy. I grew up doing musical theater. I thought that I was going to be a musical person, but you know, I'm not a very good dancer. If you watch the film, you will realize this. And so it was so fun to be able to do everything I love to do. And I think that for some of the comedy stuff, the directors and the writers would kind of allow me to try stuff, and they would allow me to pitch jokes, you know. So I think that was really nice to be able to have the freedom to be like, hey guys, I think this would be really funny. I'm going to do it. And they're like, okay. And then sometimes it would work and sometimes it wouldn't. But, you know, even in a crunch time, we didn't have like this excessive amount of time to let me just like improvise, which I wasn't allowed to do. But they would allow me to try things. And that was really, really cool to do.
That kind of stuff comes off on screen as well. I really get the sense watching it, you get a sense a lot of the individual personalities that all went into making this film come across on screen, because tonally it's like pitch perfect. It all works beautifully, but you really feel these like individual identities and all these individual voices and talents coming through on screen that are so different and so unique. And it just adds to like this one like beautiful giant painting. It's very, very special to watch because you don't always get that. You know, sometimes it's just like the auteur or like, you know, we go with what the script says. And this movie didn't feel like that. It felt very genuine. It felt like a team effort was happening on screen.
Oh, that's so nice to hear that comes across. Because it definitely was. It was absolutely a team effort. There was nobody, no egos went into this film. I think everybody went into it knowing that we were a group and that we were all working together. Even though, like, what I will say is that Zeno Mountain Farm, which is the people that are the producers of this film and that have been doing this for quite some time, their whole thing is inclusive filmmaking. And so they're a camp in Vermont and they're this hippie community that is so wonderful and kind. And so they were kind of like a big group already. Some of us came in who were outsiders, but for the most part, I think it was me and maybe Ricky was the only other one. I think we were the only two that weren't part of the camp already.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think they had that environment kind of already established.
Yeah. They had that familial kind of vibe already going in.
Yeah.
That's great.
But they never made us feel like outsiders.
Yeah.
You know, I think they made us absolutely feel like we were part of the group, and a team effort is the best way to put it.
I'm a big fan of A, high school movies, B, like high school musicals, not specifically High School Musical, not so much that, but high school musicals.
Sure.
I am a big fan of. What are some of your favorites? There's a lot of homages in this movie to some of the greats, as you mentioned, like Grease. You know, the setup is very Grease-esque. What are some of your favorite high school musicals? Because I know you got some if you're a theater kid.
Let's see. What's my favorite? So I actually don't like Grease. Mainly because, yeah, no. The message of Grease is so terrible.
It's really bad.
It's really bad.
It's
so awful. And I feel like it's just the absolute worst. Grease 2, better, because it's insane. I think Grease 2 is like, Grease was very serious about like what they were doing, and then the message that they instilled was awful. But then like Grease 2 is just so insane that it crosses over that level of, you're like, oh no, this is great.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm watching, but I will continue to watch it.
Grease 2 does not take itself seriously at all.
No, at all. And it's wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess Hairspray.
There you go. That's a great
Hairspray.
one. That's a great one.
You want to talk positive, like that has a great message, and it's like all about being yourself, and it's the opposite of Grease.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is great.
I forget how I grew up on Grease, so like I have that nostalgia thing, and then every time it gets to the end, I'm like, oh my.
You're like, oh no. Yeah, it's so bad. It did not age well.
Yeah, it did not age well.
I don't even know if it aged well in the time.
Right.
Like it just, I think about it all the time because we've had to talk about it so many times that it's like, it's the worst. It's absolutely the worst. Like the songs are fine, but like, yeah no. I'm going to say Hairspray.
Hairspray's fantastic. Ricky Lake is just like a treasure in that movie.
Yeah, and every iteration of it, like I've seen it on Broadway, and like it just keeps getting better with each time it occurs.
You said the directors made the team feel like you weren't up against it. You weren't rushed and everything, which is fantastic. But just talk to us a little bit about the work that goes into making a musical, you know, like to shooting a musical, working on the musical sequences and what it's all like behind the scenes. Kind of take the audience into there.
Oh, it's movie magic. Well, so we recorded the songs before we even started shooting. So Mumu, who wrote all the music, came down to where I live, and we went to a recording studio, and we kind of hung out there for a weekend and, you know, did all the songs. And then on set, we kind of just like lip synced or sang along to the stuff that we had already done. I will say that the songs, so Leave Behind is the song that I get to sing, which is so fun. But we filmed it 4 different ways because we couldn't really figure out how it wanted to be. And so when I finally saw the final version, I was like, oh, you picked that one. Like we were like in the woods. There was like a drone at one point. I mean, we did it so many ways. There was a night where I had to go down a hill and had to like weave in between dancers, and it was freezing cold and it was pitch black. That was crazy. So like all those things didn't make it, but we did them.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I feel like with that kind of stuff, some of it's trial and error, but some of it's all on the page. So you just kind of film it like a movie, but it's all, none of it's in order. You watch the film, and you're like, oh, right. That's why I did that.
Right. Yeah. You shoot one shot. And you're like, why? Sometimes you just moving so fast. You're like, why do we just do that? And then you have to wait until the cut to be like, oh, right.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You're like, oh, sure. This does make sense.
So the film is just, incredible sequence after incredible sequence, really fun, memorable stuff. Which scene or sequence for you will be the most memorable? Now being a few years probably, right, removed from the actual filming of it. Which one do you remember the most?
I blacked out for most of it, so I don't really remember. I mean, all of it was so great, and there were different moments. I think Leave Behind was very special just because it was like my Elsa moment.
Yeah.
It's a song that I feel okay. I feel like I did an okay job, I guess.
You did a great job.
And thank you. There was something so powerful about having a person who looks like me on a screen singing this powerful song. It felt like a moment that, if I was a kid and I got to see someone do that, I would have just thought the world was open to me. I was very lucky and my family kind of did that for me, but I just feel like I wish I had that as a kid to see. And it just, I don't know, there's something so special about it to me. Because I always say I want to make stuff that I didn't get to see as a kid. And I did it. And I think that's really special.
Who doesn't love a great musical? And if you want to check out Best Summer Ever, you can. You can see it right now. It is streaming on Amazon Prime, Fandango at home, or on Plex. So a few options for you to check it out there. If you don't have those, I believe it is also available on demand. Our next film that we're looking back at is one of the most powerful, heart-wrenching films that we've ever screened at LADFF. And this film is by Emil Gallardo. It's called 1, 2, 3, All Eyes on Me. The film would go on to win Best of the Fest and Best Performance at the 2020 Los Angeles Diversity Film Festival. You can watch it. I implore you all to do so because the short film is streaming on Max. But for now, check out this interview with filmmaker, the director of 1, 2, 3, All Eyes on Me, Emil Gallardo. Emil, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Tell the audience about your film, 1, 2, 3, All Eyes on Me.
Well, so it's first a very intense film. It came from just feeling like we weren't doing enough as a country. And I didn't feel like that was due to a lack of awareness or even other films. I mean, obviously, we're aware that mass shootings happen, some of which are at schools. But what I felt like was missing was the emotional understanding that people needed to change things. And what I mean by that is, I'll give you an example. When I saw Saving Private Ryan years and years ago, that opening scene where the gate on the boat comes down and all the soldiers run out and then they just start getting blown up left and right as they're running onto the beach,
right,
made me understand how chaotic, how random, how ridiculous, how unjust, how brutal war was. It wasn't this glamorized, heroic thing. It wasn't it just felt chaotic and horrible. And it gave me an emotional understanding of what that situation was like without having to actually be there. And I felt like I wanted to do something similar for these situations. I wanted people, without ever having to be in one of these or even know someone, to put them in the classroom and make them feel what this teacher is going through. And through that understanding, really sense how wrong this is, with the hope that some change would come from that.
Yeah, well, and you pull it off quite masterfully. It is a very difficult watch, but I would say a very necessary watch. And I can imagine that this, was a hard movie to make, not just even the production of it, but it must have been a hard movie to decide to make, knowing that you're going to be exploring a very dark subject matter. How did you decide, okay, this is going to be my next film, to dive into this very very important subject.
Yeah, I mean, so first, I think you're extremely accurate in that this was, I mean, to write anything and then to direct it, my process is very much about putting myself there emotionally. So yeah, I'm kind of, and then in the research phase, which was pretty decent for this, I'm listening to 911 calls, I'm interviewing teachers, I'm looking up school protocols for handling lockdown situations. One of the teachers I interviewed was in a lockdown situation. So yeah, I'm like kind of immersing myself in this world just to be able to write it and then to cast it and all the rehearsals. So it was a hard process and not fun a lot of the time. I mean, you're thinking about some of the worst stuff possible, but it felt important to make, and it felt like the next film I needed to make. Just because, I mean, so to back up a step, so my mom was a teacher for 30 years. So that's just kind of the backdrop. I always have had a lot of respect for teachers, but I saw this cell phone video that was filmed in Mexico, actually. And there's guys shooting at each other directly outside this school. And in the video is only maybe a minute and a half long, but you see this teacher and she has like elementary school age kids, and she gets them to lay down on the floor and she's down on the ground with them. And she starts singing to them, and she asks them, "Will you please sing with me?" And as they're scared and they're kind of crying, and she's like, "No, niños, like sing with me." And so as they're singing with her, like you're hearing gunshots in the background.
Wow.
And I just remember watching this thing, and I'm like, "Who is this person? Like she's so incredible. Like her courage, her compassion, how dedicated she is to her job and to her students. And she's not only trying to protect them physically, but at this point, what we're watching is she's also trying to protect them emotionally." And I'm just like, I need to tell a story about somebody like that. And so that was the spark that I'm like, I want to make this story, but I want to make it from this teacher's perspective. And I want to show how, she starts off completely committed, completely vibrant. And then this situation is totally devastating and totally overwhelming to her. When all the things kind of come together, there's that feeling inside when you're like, I'm going to make this no matter what. And that was the feeling I got. And then we did.
And it's really, as you were talking about earlier, to put the audience in that classroom is really tough because, you kind of see all the normal day-to-day difficulties of, what this teacher has to go through. The teachers already have a tough job, which is sad and true. Now teachers are kind of like have this additional responsibility of protecting the kids from something that we see far too often, which is mass shootings. So you perfectly illustrated. It is a beautiful ode to teachers and all that they do, not just this dark time.
Well, first, thank you. I think the beginning part of the film came about because as I was interviewing the teachers, one of the questions I had written down was, what is the one thing beyond the story? Like, I didn't even get into the plot with some of the people I spoke with, but it was like, what is the one thing that I need to capture so that you feel like this is an accurate representation of you and your day? And what was interesting is, regardless of the teachers that I spoke with, and like none of them were related or knew one another, they all said the same thing. Our job is really hard every day. Kids come in, they're tired, some might be hungry, some might be really excited, some might be sad. We have our agenda of what we want to teach them in that day, but inevitably something or multiple things come up throughout our day that just make every day really challenging. So I never see that in movies. In movies, the kids are smiling, and when you tell them to sit down, 100% of them sit down and they're quiet when they're told to be. Like, that is not what it's like.
Right. Yeah.
So I hear this from different teachers. Literally, I spoke to one on the East Coast, one in LA, and I'm like, they're saying the exact same thing. They've never even met. So like, I need to do that. Like, that was my experience. That is their experience. I need that to be represented. And that's been rewarded by teachers who have seen the film in different festivals saying like, wow, like I really felt like you captured what this is like. So I think that's where that came from.
The performance by your lead, Pharrell Walker, she's just jaw-dropping.
Yeah.
She's incredible. But also the performances that you get out of these young actors,
thank you,
they're just heartbreaking. Talk to us about your process with working with these kids.
So we filmed this in Oakland, and I've lived up here about 8 years now. I'm originally from LA. But what I quickly discovered in the Bay Area is that if you are trying to cast people of color it is very difficult sometimes. And I already knew that before Derek and I, my writing partner, wrote this script. And it was a conscious decision to make the cast primarily Latino. And I knew that was, and I was like, when I wrote the script, I'm like, how am I ever going to get a school to agree to let me make this there? And how am I ever going to get enough parents? And how am I ever going to get enough Latinx kids? Because the pool is very small.
Yeah.
And so we realized quickly, like, they're not going to be actors. That's the answer. There's no shortage of like Latinos and Latinas here, but just in terms of actors, there is. So that we're like, okay, they're not going to be actors. And so what we ended up with was 20 kids, 10 boys, 10 girls, which was the plan, but 18 of them had never acted before. And so we knew we were just going to have to spend a lot of time getting them comfortable. Kind of, we did a whole rundown on like, you know, when the camera's near you, or even when the camera's not near you, don't look into the lens.
Right.
You know, just like, here's a mark, you know, that's when we say back to one, it means go back to your first position. All the like things that a lot of times we take for granted as filmmakers working with actors, like none of that stuff was an option to us. So that was kind of the logistical side of things. On the emotional side of things, we had 2 rehearsal days. I mean, I could literally talk about this for an hour. I just taught a class on all the things that we did working with kids in this film. But it kind of boils down to, we first created an environment of trust where they knew me, they knew Pharrell. They saw Pharrell as an authority figure, which we kind of built that into the rehearsals. Like I would have Pharrell lead a lot of the exercises so they could start to associate her with someone that they listened to.
That's very smart.
So we did that. And then what we would do every morning with the entire cast and crew, and so we're talking like 40, 45 people. We form one big circle, and then I would pick the theme of the day, like the emotional kind of tone of that day. And we would do this sound and gesture exercise. So for example, the first day was just a painting day. So I'm like, okay, we're going to do a sound and gesture around fun. And so I would kick it off and I would make some funny noise and I would make some gesture that represented fun. And then everybody else, so imagine like 44 other people would then do the same thing. And then we would go to the next person. And I think what that did is it quickly broke down the barriers between all of us. Like we were one big team, and you have an 8-year-old standing across from a 30-year-old, but they're doing the same thing. And so it just made everybody feel approachable. And so we did a bunch of stuff like that to kind of create this atmosphere of safety and trust. And they knew that they could be vulnerable. And that was leading up to our day 3, which was our final day with the kids, which was the most intense day. And we structured it that way. So by the time they got to day 3, they had already rehearsed for 2 days. They already had 2 days shooting. So they're 4 days in. Now on day 5, now we're asking them for these more intense emotions. So it was a lot of that. And we wouldn't tell them when we would roll. So we would just start the scene, and Pharrell was kind of in on that with us. And a lot of times they were just feeding off of her energy and tried to capture as much of it as we could.
It sounds like a great approach, and it shows up on the screen. It really feels authentic for anybody who's either gone to a public school or sat in on an elementary school classroom. It feels very authentic.
Thank you.
The film's got great pacing, editing style, and all that complements, the great work that we see on screen with the cinematography and production design. It's all really well executed top to bottom.
Oh, thank you.
When I watched it, I was like, man, this guy really knows how to work with a team. And then I saw that you had an AD background, and I was like, bingo, that's that explains it. Talk to us a little bit about, well, I mean, I guess you kind of did right there. Like that is a great exercise to not only get your cast involved, but get the entire crew involved. What has helped you from your AD career in your writing and directing career?
Great question. The first thing I realized when I started making my own films was that I did not know how to relate to actors whatsoever. I was still kind of viewing it in that AD actor dynamic. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, like actors used to kind of annoy me. They were an unpredictable part of every day that I felt should be predictable. Like there's all kinds of things that get thrown at you as an AD, but I felt like, hey, we're all professionals. We're all here to do a job, regardless of the side of the camera that you're on. And then you have these like wild cards. But then when I started directing, I realized like so much of directing, like I'm telling my story through these people. And I'll give you a quick story. Long time ago, I'm in downtown LA, middle of the summer. It's, 95 degrees. We're on the rooftop of this building. And I think it was a car commercial or something. I don't remember. But I'm a PA. And I'm holding an umbrella, and the first AD tells me, make sure you cover the talent with the umbrella.
Right.
And the umbrella is only big enough. There's like 2 leads in this thing They're standing next to each other. There's only enough umbrella space for these two actors. And I'm like, okay. And I got really mad. Like, I'm out here burning and I'm bald, and I'm like, I'm burning and, and I'm holding this thing for them and they don't even seem that appreciative.
Right.
And I was pissed. So I did it, and then afterwards I remember talking to the AD and he's like, no, you have to understand, like, that's what we're putting on film. Like that's what we're filming. Like, if they get sunburned, if they get dehydrated, if they can't work, like, nobody else here has a job. I'm like, okay.
Or even if they're crabby, like, you can, it could show up on screen.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that was kind of my first, like, oh, okay, that's interesting. I was just thinking about it from one angle. You gave me a different one. Okay, interesting. But then when I started directing, I'm like, okay, it's that plus so much more. Like, you are asking, as a writer and director, you are asking these people to experience the craziness you thought of in your head. You are asking them to live it. And in this film, I'm asking Pharrell to go through some very intense emotions. And she is so committed and so talented. She is going through very close to what we have described. And it is completely not her fault. Like, Derek and I wrote the script. We created this situation and she's living it. And so I think the first thing, to go back to your question, the first thing was kind of unlearning some stuff.
Yeah.
Was like, hey, wait a minute, this is a different relationship. I'm asking different things. And if I'm going to be effective in directing actors, I need to really empathize with what they are going through and what I'm asking them to go through. And so part of the reason 1, 2, 3 was so difficult was because I went through a lot of those emotions too. Same with the kids. Like, I feel like I need to be emotionally right there with them so that they understand, like, this person is willing to commit in the same way that they're asking me to. And then the other just hard skills, it's like, yeah, I'm very realistic. When Marissa, our AD on this, was like, we need to move on, I was pretty good about moving on.
Right.
But, just being very practical, like, how can we make the most of our time? It's ambitious. So what can we do? How can we create an environment? I think it goes back to that. Now, instead of looking at efficiency in terms of like, well, if we shoot this shot before that shot, that's more efficient because of X, Y, and Z. I look at it as that plus, okay, how can we build an environment? I'm willing to spend 20 minutes up front every day to create an environment where we can get the best performances, not only because I want that for the film, but it's also the most efficient, right? Like, now we don't need to do 5 more takes because we already got it. Let's get on to the next thing. So I think it's that. It's all just kind of building on one another. It's definitely a helpful background to have coming into directing my own stuff.
Absolutely. And I mean, you're off to a great start, my friend. I'm excited to see what you got next. Tremendous film. 1, 2, 3, All Eyes on Me. Once again, it is streaming on Max. Check it out if you haven't seen it already. And speaking of incredibly powerful films, the final movie that we're going to be revisiting today is a documentary. It's called Bubjan. Our co-host Bella F. Stratus actually mentioned this film not too long ago in one of our bonus episodes while she was discussing Persepolis. We were discussing the connections between the two films. So she saw Bubjan at LADFF and adored it, and there's a lot to adore here. So check out this incredible interview we've got as we chat with producer Rostam Zafair and director Nicholas Mihm. And if you want to see Bubjan, you can see it. It is streaming right now for free on YouTube. So don't miss it. For now, check out this awesome interview. All right, we're honored to be joined by director Nicholas Mihm and executive producer Rostam Zafair. Thank you both for being here. Congratulations on this remarkable film, Bubjan. Nicholas, why don't you start us off here and tell us a little bit about this film and how it got started?
Yeah, so I had met Rostam a couple years ago while finishing up a film. We actually had met in Greece while we were filming with Helen Maroulis, who's an Olympic wrestler. And Helen was friends with Rostam, and we had gotten introduced to each other, and Rostam and I just became instantly friends. And months later, Rostam had kind of approached me and was like, hey, so I have a story that I want to tell, and it's a story of my grandfather. And we're doing a series of in-depth interviews with Humans of New York creator Brandon Stanton, and I would love to film it. So he invited me down to Atlanta, went down there with a crew, filmed it, was just only kind of on as like a producer wasn't planning to do anything past that. We didn't really have an end goal for the film. It was just kind of to get Bubjan's story on record and just to be able to have it stored somewhere just so we could refer to it later. So Rostam and his family could refer to it later. And just after the first day, right, Rostam, I think after the first day, we were like, okay, this needs to be a film, at least a short film. The stories that Bubjan is telling right now are pretty insane. And we should definitely pursue this further and talk to Brandon Stanton about it. And he agreed. And here we are.
And Rostam, how did you get connected with Brandon? But even before that, what kind of inspired you to, I guess, document your grandfather's story? I mean, obviously it's such an incredible story and includes so much like rich history about Iran and himself. But what motivated you that it was like time to get this down on paper and recorded?
Yeah, I think it must have been middle school or maybe even earlier when I started recording my grandfather's life and his lessons. I always thought he was like the most wonderful, kind, loving human being. And he just felt like, he felt different from almost anyone else I've met as a kid. And even now he feels different. And I started, one day my goal was to write a book that like told his whole life story. And I loved writing. I still do. Love poetry. And so I had all these recordings as a kid. And then I think because I loved, my grandfather and the passion he instilled for poetry, I really got into storytelling and literature, which then drew me to Humans in New York. So if you had asked, most 13 or 14-year-old kids, what's your favorite artist? I think very few of them would have said Brandon Stanton. But since I was 13 or 14, I would say that. Like other people would say like famous musicians or like, Drake or whoever, but I would have been like, Brandon Stanton. And so I read his stuff since I was a kid and fantasized about, having a story there and all that sort of stuff. And years later, I was talking about it to someone in New York and they're like, oh, well, I have his email. So I shot him an email and, nothing happened. And one day, like 6 months later, I just was like, you know what? I'm going to send a second email and just, followed up. And that same day, I think he got back to me and we jumped on a Zoom call and I found out that he, outside New York, he lives in Decatur and it's not, it wasn't too far from me. Right. And I was like, wow, this person who was like one of my longtime heroes lives 15 minutes down the road. And, we became fast friends ever since.
And was he, the more you started talking to him, the more you started talking to him about your grandfather, was he hooked and that kind of motivated both of you guys to take the next step to document your grandfather's story?
It wasn't clear cut or, simple in any sense. I definitely pitched it early on because, it's always been on my mind, but Brandon's an incredible artist and he has runs into a lot of amazing people with great stories to tell. So I definitely think it was on his mind. And, when he did wanted to pursue it, he thought it would be maybe a 3 or 4 post series. It would take 2 interviews. It wasn't something that we didn't anticipate from the beginning it would take on the life that it did, right? And now we're 42 interviews in, and these interviews last 2-3 hours. And Brandon has told me just how much it's shaped him as a human being, and how much my grandfather's ideals and take on life and on wisdom, how much it shaped him as a person. So that was personally really rewarding to hear, to see one of my heroes, right, like artists, tell the story of like, one of my greatest heroes, my grandfather. It just feels very surreal, and I just definitely see an invisible hand kind of moving all this along.
That's incredible, man. What an incredible story. And obviously your grandfather has an incredible story. As you talked about, like growing up, you were hearing his stories and blown away by them. But did the experience for you shift at all when you decided to dive full bore into this project? What was this experience like for you in terms of like documenting his story? Did you learn anything new about him, about your family's history while you were making this film?
Great question. I feel like the luckiest person in the world I wanted to tell my grandpa's stories, and I had the chance to now work on it, with some amazing artists like Brandon, like Nick, like Lisa, in 2 different modalities, and film and the written word. And they're very different, and they're very similar too in some ways. I think starting off, I felt that I knew the story, and I just wanted to share it with other people. And the more interviews I did, the more I was a part of these 2 projects, the more I realized I'm actually the person who gets to benefit the most, because I get the most raw amount of time with my grandfather. And I think that was my takeaway. It was like, no matter if these things didn't go anywhere, it was still the greatest use of my time I've ever spent. And I always tell people, go just spend some time with your grandparents, and just, or someone you love in your family, and just spend 4 or 5 hours capturing all the questions you wish you would have asked 20, 30 years from now, because they really are a treasure trove. And I felt like I got to know my grandfather more deeper than ever, my culture, my family, and just so much more. And oftentimes you miss the details when you just don't dig in. And these small details that I guess my grandpa didn't think were particularly useful for me to know, they're magic. They're magic, and they make me smile. And I use them in my daily life, and I recount the stories. And so I really enjoyed the process.
Yeah, little things like him growing that tree in his garden were just like, wow, that's, obviously the political work he did is incredible, but like talking about like nurturing life in his garden as kind of like an introduction to this character as a child was, like, I found really fascinating and allegorical in a really beautiful way.
Absolutely. And also, like, for example, I knew that he had wrote a particular poem for my grandmother, but to get the context and the condition of, when he wrote it and why he wrote it, and to understand, like, I think what came out a lot this is like their love story too, of like how they were separated for 4 years, and how she wrote every single day. She wrote him a letter. I mean, this is like the Notebook, the Persian Notebook on steroids, right? And these are just examples where his father was worried that he wasn't going to win the race because he's too much of an idealist. And he told his dad, hey, I'm not trying to win this. And his dad's like, once he realized that, he goes, okay, well, then I'm going to give you the one thing I can, which is this Jeep, and you go across and you do what you need to do, right? Like these little moments that happen. Brandon will tell a lot more of the story here in a bit, but there's just these elements that for me personally had profound impact. And yeah, I couldn't be more grateful to have like discovered these moments.
And yeah, Nick, why don't you touch on what your experience was like making this film, sitting there throughout this interview process, not growing up with this man and hearing his incredible story.
I mean, I think, like I said earlier, I started off this project just as a producer. So I was just kind of in the back room, with my Comtech on, the headphones on, and was just listening to these, everything's done in Farsi. So I was just listening to Rostam's translation and sitting back there on my laptop and like trying to do other work, preparing for the next part of the shoot or the next day, and not being able to focus because I was, pretty captivated by, the journey that Bubjan had gone on, and, his time as a boy in Iran, his time in parliament in Iran, and then his ultimately having to flee. Like it was very clear to me that there was an avenue for a film, and for at least a short film. And hearing, like you mentioned, Nick, the story of the mulberry tree and the garden, and hearing him and his, stressing importance and how, gardening as a child, like taught him how to nurture things, and then using that nurturing aspect of his personality to nurture the community and villages across Iran. It was just like very clear. I could already see like the dots kind of connecting during the time, and approached Rostam and was like, hey man, let me direct this. Like, let's let me direct this. Let me come back in a couple months and let's do more interviews. And that's really all a credit to the interviews that Brandon does. Obviously he's built this huge platform that's been so successful for so long. And it's because he's an amazing interviewer. And before jumping on this project, I did pride myself in my interview capabilities and how I talk to subjects for my documentaries. But then watching Brandon, I was like, oh my gosh, I am a noob. Like I don't know what I'm doing. And so it was really on that kind of level, it was great to kind of watch the master work. And even with the language barrier, there was just like a finesse to it, and a finesse to the way he asked questions, the way he communicated with Bubjan, and really allowed Bubjan to open up and to kind of spill everything. And so it was a great learning experience. And then jumping into the edit was, a really tough challenge, because I do not speak Farsi, and it is a very beautiful and very complicated language. Rostam and I spent hours and hours going through these transcriptions and translations, because you ask one Persian person what this means, and then it means something completely different to another. So, kind of going back and forth, the two of us just trying to find the most beautiful and poetic way to tell it was a real challenge. And we have had amazing editor Azadeh Navai who jumped in with us towards the beginning, and she really helped us out because she's from Iran, and this story really connected with her, and so that she was extremely helpful. And then just learning about, I was not that familiar with the history. Like, I think, I've told Rostam this before, like the most I knew about Iran's history was probably from the movie Argo. So, and I don't even think, I think it's come out that movie hasn't, took some liberties in the historical accuracy of it.
But I'm sure.
Yeah, but, amazing movie, but it still took some liberties. But, and just kind of learning about the Shah, and like really taking a deep dive into the Shah and his family, and like, the things he was trying to do for the country and trying to make it a progressive country, but at the same time, not being able to really compromise power or something like that, and having this secret police under his wing, but also, trying to do a lot of good at the same time. So it was like this very contradictory, a lot of conflict between, internal conflict with that man. And it was just really interesting. And I think something that I'm really grateful to be able to have taken a deep dive into.
And I gotta say, Nick, that it's not easy to be able to speak about Iran in a way that's honest. It doesn't emotionally trigger a large community of people. I don't know. Maybe the best way to describe it is I love Lord of the Rings, and I think we all like want to be like Aragorn to some extent, or one of those cool characters. But the Iranians were kind of like the dwarves. We're like a very proud people. We're like, we fight about everything. We're like, there's a lot of disagreement on like, even on basics of what has happened in the past. And so I think, how do you present the truth, right? And I know that's probably the core question for documentaries, for storytelling in general, is a core question at least. But that's something that it really takes a commitment to not flattening the different ontological levels of being that are happening at any given one time in a society. And I think Nick did a phenomenal job of that. I think Brandon has done a phenomenal job of that. And there's some people you wonder, wait, how did that person pull that off? But with Brandon, you don't have to wonder. The guy is a complete animal, like of a workhorse. I mean, he wakes up at 3, 4, and he's riding 5-6 hours every single day. And he knows more about Iranian history and culture than almost any Iranian I've met. I remember him starting. My dad was he's always been someone who he provides the opposite point of view on the projects I've worked on, and is very stern in the way he judges and the way he is critical of projects. And because he's a historian at heart, and he's an academic, and he wants things to be right. And so when he heard Brandon was going to tell the story of his father and of Iran into some level in the Book of Kings, he was not very convinced. And he sat down with Brandon, and he tried to give him an impossible task. He gave him like 20 books to read and all these suggestions, and Brandon read them all in like 2 or 3 weeks. And I remember coming back, and my same dad who had expressed significant concern was like, this guy is like amazing. Why don't you know as much history as Brandon? You should study your Persian more. And it backfired on me. But I was so happy because it meant Brandon had won a huge victory in the heart of my father, which I was like, if he can win the heart of my father, he can win the heart of anyone when it comes to Iranian history and culture.
Yeah, that it's all systems go.
Amen.
What has your father and your grandfather, have they seen this film now? And if so, what were their thoughts?
For me, one of the most magical parts of being a part of the making of this film was watching it for the first time with my dad and my grandpa. We watched it in my childhood room where me and my twin brother like had bunk beds, and Same home we've had since we were 2 years old. It is not a particularly big home. I think when my dad first got it, must have been like 1,500 square feet. And so the three of us were sitting on that childhood bed, or one of us maybe had a chair next to it. I remember looking over and just seeing them both, like just tears streaming down their face, and these stories that they had told in their own words now being brought to life with just amazing talent. I mean, our sound design people, our animator, our director. I mean, it was just, I've seen the film, I don't know, 30, 40, I don't know how many times. And it just every time it just strikes a really deep chord, and I knew it did for them. And it made me so happy to see, because, when we first discussed this, almost everyone in my family didn't want me to pursue this because we're a pretty, private family. And I think some of them had asked my grandfather in the past to tell a story, and he had always kind of been more hesitant. But this time he had said, I trust Rostam, and he has my vote. And that, to me, just to have that responsibility and that trust of my grandfather and be able to deliver it for him in a way that now my whole family loves it, was like the ultimate privilege.
As you both touched on, Bubjan, he speaks so poetically about his story and the history of Iran, but you complemented it with beautiful poetic imagery in many different mediums. As you talked about, there's animation, which is gorgeous. There is historical footage. There's recreations. If you can, talk to us a little bit about your visual approach to telling this story and how you decided to incorporate those mediums.
Yeah. I think, and Rostam, you might remember this. I think, when we were when I was still a producer on the film and we were discussing the possibility of me jumping on as director and like taking it to the end, I think the first thing we talked about was like, we should animate some of these stories. Because, just the descriptiveness that Bubjan gives us, talking about his childhood, talking about his family and the little gardens that they grew. Like, I'm not a huge fan of recreations. Like, we have a little bit of that in this film, but I feel like being able to animate, having that privilege to work with the animation team of Neon Zoo and Elise Kelly, it just opens up so many doors for you creatively and aesthetically. And this is the second time I've worked with that team. The first time being in The Dark of the Valley, which Los Angeles Diversity Film Festival graciously played a couple of years ago. And so kind of already being familiar with the process, I was like, there's no question that we should do this again. Like, it was so much fun the first time. I've learned so much more as a director and as a filmmaker. I think maybe the first call that we had was to Elise, and her team immediately jumped on. And a lot of her team are spread out across the world. Some are from Iran, some are from Syria. Some have had to deal with similar stories in their family's history. So they were so amazing and so passionate about the project, and brought a feel and an emotion to it, and just like this love and care to it that I don't think just straight archival or straight reenactments could have really given it. There's just it opens up so much for us, and very grateful that we were able to do it again.
And I think visually, one thing, where the cameras were pointing and what they were capturing, that's all under Nick's purview. I think the thing that I wanted to really make sure was that we were grounding it in truth, because early on you could go to many different places to shoot some of these scenes. But my grandpa lived his whole life being who he is, not more than that, not less than that. And so for me, it was really important that we stayed true to his actual life, to his actual habits. Like, the garden that he tends is actually his garden. The road he walks is actually the road by our house. The house he's in is actually his home, And so I think that was one piece that touched on that. And then another piece was the home itself. Like, I felt growing up, I lived in a little Iran. Like, our home is almost like a museum that, in the sense that it's collecting all these, articles and photographs and poems and like these little, reminders of where we come from culturally. We have a jar of soil, which is very standard for like Iranians to have from Iranian soil. There's, our great poets are, my grandfather's copy of the Book of Kings from when he was a kid. And so it lends itself, I think, very well visually. And then to Nick's point with animation design, one of my friends, Hamid Rahmanian, is a great illustrator of the Book of Kings. And Elise's team was able to take his illustrations and just breathe life into it in a way that I just found so cool. And just animation itself, because animation can show things that are true on a higher plane of reality. They're spiritually true. Like, yeah, and I don't want to give too much away from the film, but there's just these scenes where, they're able to create through magical realism what is happening both physically and what is happening metaphorically in a way that I don't think another medium could do as well. And that was the part, like, I feel like a kid on Christmas every time we got a new series of animation sketches, because, the sketches move from like immature to kind of completely done over a series of, several weeks or months. And so every new version has some new element, and whether it was a Persian chai glass or whether it was Nick's dog or Lisa's cat in the big, it made me so happy to see it come to life, and you could tell that it was everyone who worked on this project was proud of it and was putting their own thumbprint on it, which to me was really cool, because my grandpa's life is all about getting buy-in and participation and doing things together. And I think that the film is able to spread that same message, not only in its message, but in its making, which I think is important.
That was the only time I've ever abused my director power, was asking Elise and her team to animate my little dog in one of the scenes.
That's amazing. What a great story. I think, this film is so, it's incredible for you, Rostam, that you can document your grandfather's life and experience, but it's also, I think, an important film and story to be released now, as we're seeing more and more countries kind of flirt with tyranny or elect tyrannical leaders, flirt with oppressive regimes and stuff. And I couldn't help but think about that while I was watching it. So I wanted to see if you had any thoughts on that, if you noticed any parallels to the world we're living in today, and then if you could also discuss the current situation in Iran.
Yeah, absolutely. To your first point, I think so much of this film and my grandpa's story is rising up against injustice and against tyranny. And so much of it is about memory, both an individual's memory and a society's memory. Because if we don't know who we are and we're not connected to that, it's hard to help ourselves. I think that's something that this film drives home. And that's the power of culture. My grandpa talks about culture like a river, in the sense of the water itself or the generations that have come and gone, but the actual movement, that dynamicism, that momentum is culture, right? And so if we're rooting our culture in things that are tolerance, justice, open-mindedness, inclusivity, diversity, then that river is able to run. And if we become closed-minded and close-hearted, then it becomes a swamp. And those are all secondhand ideas I learned from my grandfather. But I love that image that he gave me recently when I asked him a similar question. And it's important to understand that it's easy to look at places abroad, but tyranny creeps up in our own backyards and sometimes even in our own hearts, with our egos and polarization in this country. So I think that my grandpa talks that, like, voting is not just a democracy, something you do, let's say, once or a few times a year. It's really feeling ownership for your community and acting and participating and finding ways that you can use your gifts for the betterment of, yourself and those around you. And so what does that more active look like? In Iran's situation, is to touch on your last point, was Iran now for about 44 years has been under a radical Islamic theocracy that, kills people for having different views on sexuality or on God or on any number of things. And, a lot of it with a sense of complete arbitrariness, calling vague punishments like crimes against God and murdering people without trials. And not only that, telling their families they can't come out and mourn their son or their daughter. We're talking, anywhere from 9-year-old kids, to adults. And when the uprising happened in September, there was, been about over 20,000 young people under the age of 21 imprisoned for nonviolent protests. And I know that this September 16th, for the anniversary of the murder of Mahsa Amini, the people of Iran are going to take to the streets again and unite again. And so I think the idea is one of solidarity that runs through this struggle in Iran and the struggle that countries all around the world face. And I think a good illustration of this is one of our poets, Sadi, wrote this little passage where there's 100 people who their caravans get ransacked by 2 thieves and everything they have is stolen from them. And finally, someone asked that group of people, how come you were able to get robbed? There's 100 of you and there's only 2 of them. And they answer, well, those 2 were together and we were all alone. I think that's where we are right now.
There you have it. 3 more outstanding films that we've had the pleasure of screening at LADFF. But if you want to see some of the greatest hits from this year's batch, then you're going to want to save the dates. August 22nd through August 24th. The screenings will be in LA, so stay tuned for more info. You can go to ladff.com to sign up for our mailing list. You can also follow us on Instagram at LA Diversity Film Fest. Those are 2 places where you can stay up to date with the festival, hear all the news, and there will be plenty of news coming your way within the next few weeks and months. As for the Gimme Three Podcast, as always, you can follow us on Instagram as well at Gimme Three Podcast. That's GIMME, spell out 3 podcast. Gimme Three Podcast. You can send us messages there. You can follow us, stay up to date with us. Let us know what you think of the show. Let us know if you've got any suggestions for themes, anything like that. There's another way to get a hold of us as well, and that's by sending us a text message. If you scroll down to our episode description here, you'll see a link that says send us a text message. Click that link. Boom. You can drop right into our DMs and drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you all. That about does it for the show today, everybody. We want to thank you all, as always, for listening to the Gimme Three Podcast. Once again, next week we will be discussing 3 greats from the late, great Val Kilmer. So you're not going to want to miss that. But until then, thank you all for listening to the Gimme Three Podcast, and we will see you at the movies.